All right, so let's talk about routing in Angular. As we have seen already in React applications, we are implementing single-page applications in which you really only load one single page, and then using routing, using hashtags at the end of URLs, uh, we uh, we um, we implement navigation by loading dynamically HTML snippets and replacing the content, right, with those snippets and giving the illusion that we are indeed navigating from one page to the next. But we really are always in the same page. We just flip through several components, right, and giving the ability or the illusion or the use case, right, of being able to navigate from one content to the next. So that mechanism is referred to as routing, right? And we saw how that is implemented in React. Let's see how that's implemented in Angular. As we know, we're introducing Angular in a larger context of what we refer to as the mean stack. It's a combination of four technologies that work very well with one another. It's not really a framework. A framework would imply that all the components or all the systems inside of that framework somehow knew about each other or talk to each other or somehow are related. Instead, Angular, Node, and Mongo are three of the four elements in the mean stack are really just three separate technologies that don't know anything about each other, but turn out that they work very well with one another. We have Angular in the front end that user interacts with a user interface, and that trickles down to a web client service that uses Ajax to communicate with a Node.js. We'll talk about Node.js a little later today. And then Node.js talks to some database, in this particular case, MongoDB. All right, and we'll introduce that later today. So in Angular, we already had created an Angular application, which we introduced last time we met. And what we'd like to be able to show you is how we would implement navigating between multiple components. In particular, we'll choose a really simple example of implementing a couple of components like a login component, a register component, a profile component, and then see how we could perhaps navigate between them by clicking on hyperlinks. Right. So let's the mechanism behind implementing routes is all implemented under the libraries of the routes or the router, Angular router, which we already should have because when we implemented when we asked ng to create the new project, it did ask us, right, if we wanted to include routing. We said yes. So it already created some of this boilerplate stuff. We won't have to do this from scratch. In particular, we're going to have a single script, right, in app routing.ts, where we're going to be listing all the routes. We're going to be listing all the routes and saying, configuring what components should be displayed based on what route are we looking at the URL. So meaning if the URL sees this particular URL component, this URL snippet, it will display this particular component, right? And so we're going to be listing here login, profile, register, all the different components, right? And then being able to toggle between them using hyperlinks, okay? Yeah, some of this boilerplate code has already been done for us, so we won't need to do that from scratch. And we're going to be using hyperlinks to navigate between the different components. We're going to be using just a plain old regular hyperlink, an anchor. But instead of using href, right, which is what you would normally do, you would instead use a tag, an attribute which is specific for this mechanism called a router link. The router link is what glues together this pattern, this string here, maps it to the map that configures the navigation. Right, it maps it to here. Right, it says that if you see this in the URL, then show this particular component, right? This is nice in that it gives you one single place where you can maintain all the URLs and all the navigation, as opposed to in React, it's kind of spread out everywhere, right? You have routes and links, declared in different places in your React application, and that makes it harder perhaps to maintain. Instead, here in Angular, you have a single place of maintenance, right? It's easy to come back here, right, and update all these links and change the navigation any which way you want without having to go into every single component and make those changes, right? It's an easier way of maintaining the navigation. So let's actually implement this. The other thing to introduce here is the router outlet. The router outlet says, this is where I want to render, right, the component that this URL is mapped to, right? So if this says login, right, it maps to this this route, right? If you say login, this is the component that will render if it sees that route. Where will it render? It will render wherever the router outlet is declared. Okay, it's an empty element that we're going to inject the content into that router outlet dynamically whenever the route changes, and we see that it's what component to render there. All right. All right. So let's implement a couple of these components and see how we can go ahead and doing this.